And we're back on What the Funk, a little Friday recording here, a beautiful autumn day in early November. Finally developing a little bit of a routine again, getting back behind the microphone, and really excited to have Maxie Reynolds on the podcast today. She was introduced to me through the Digital Wildcatters Network, has a fantastic accent and a good story, and we're going to jump into all of that today. Works for a company called Subsea Cloud. We'll talk all about that. It works in a number of different industries, including oil and gas, so super relevant for the listeners of this podcast. So, Maxie, I kind of gave you the high level background. We want to focus on you personally, and then talk about your organization and all that fun stuff. But a question I always ask to everybody that comes on the podcast: who are you? Who is Maxie Reynolds?
I don't like it. Okay, so I suppose I don't want to get into a philosophical debate, but I have to start out by saying that there is a gap between who I think I am and how I present myself, and who you think I am and who you see. And I think that's true for everyone. I truly believe that. I think we all think that we are sort of presenting ourselves in a certain way, or that we carry ourselves in a certain way, and that our behavior and eccentricities are obvious, but they aren't. And you can see it when you flip it around. When it comes to your perception of other people, you only see the outcome. You're left to rationalize their behavior. So who I think I am may not matter. It only matters who you think I am. But to answer the question, and with that in mind, to answer the question, I think I am one of the luckiest sort of people in the world. I have to be. And I don't mean luck in some sort of divine sense, but in terms of just chance and randomly. And we can talk about that versus skill, because it's an important point if we're gonna look at who I am through this lens. But I grew up in Scotland. I was born, I guess, the right time, to be a female in the world today. At this point in time is pure luck. I had no skill. There's nothing I've done to deserve being able to start a business today, being able to grow, being able to sort of flourish around that. There's no skill there. That's all luck. So I think, thought of that way, I'm a very lucky person with some skill. That's the best summary I have of myself.
She's a lucky Scottish lass.
There we go.
That's where we're starting this. Interesting. I mean, so there's, we'll get into more details, but we can get philosophical on what the funk. That's not an issue for me whatsoever. Right. I like the way that you presented that, and a phrase that I like to use is perception is reality, right? So how I perceive you, having only talked a couple of times and looking at your LinkedIn page or your website, I've already formed a certain opinion of you, and you've already changed that a little bit with how you just presented yourself and how you feel you're lucky and your position in the world. But I mean, perception is reality.
Correct.
Marketing is so powerful, I think, in the universe today, because you could take something that's very small and make it seem really big. Something that I've actually noticed with Funk Futures, with my business, which is still a pretty small business. It's been growing pretty steadily over the 3 years that we've been in business. But I remember early on, I started putting out press releases and still do, but it was sort of making it look really official. And some people sort of laughed at it, and they're just like, why do you do these press releases? I'm like, well, because I think that it elicits a certain sense of seriousness or professionalism. And then you go to a conference or a networking event, people are like, oh, dude, you're out here killing it. And I'm thinking, that's your perception, right?
Yeah,
you
exactly.
might not know what's really going on behind the scenes, but what you see is, man, Funk Futures just added another client. They just went into a different industry. They just started a recruiting practice, whatever it is. And to them, it's like, man, you're really doing big things. And to me, it's just like, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of companies are doing big things. Maybe they're just not talking about it in the same light. So it's always
Correct.
been important
Yeah.
for me to create a perception that then becomes somebody else's reality.
Yeah, but it works both ways. You can be doing a lot behind the scenes and saying nothing. Like it really does work both ways. I kind of enjoy that aspect of life. I enjoy thinking about it because you can't be right or wrong. Like, when you're guessing for other people. So it just becomes this thought exercise. And I actually really enjoy that too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So you jumped on this morning, and I asked you what time it was, thinking that you were somewhere in the UK or in Europe
Yeah.
overseas. And you go, "Oh, it's 9." And I go, "Oh, sorry, we're doing this so late." You go, "No,
PM.
it's
Yeah.
9 in the morning. I'm in
Yeah.
California." I'm like, "Well, I'm in Colorado. That's easy. My sales guys in California." So take me through the story. How did a young Scottish lady end up not only running a business but somewhere in California?
Yeah. So okay, let's sort of back into this. So I love California. Little expensive, but I actually do.
For
I like it
real.
here. Like so bad. I will be bankrupt by the end of the week if I buy one more coffee. Like
I
it's
know.
it's it's not ideal, but it is a sort of a good place. Um, for what I like in life and for what I care about in life. So there's that. Then how did I get here? So okay, if you let me think about this. So when I was very young, like child, for the earliest memories I have of myself, I absolutely wanted to be on the move. Like, I couldn't wait to get my first bike, to get my first car, to like travel. I've always just had that bug. And I moved out of my mum's house like quite young, about 15. So, early in life, and that sort of put the kibosh on my, I guess, potential at the time because I was just a scallywag. I don't know if that's an American word. I was a social nuisance for, for 4 or 5 years after that. I didn't have my head screwed on right. I was sort of rebelling. I didn't enjoy my mother's parenting style. And so all these sort of things. And so I wanted to be an adult, and I got to taste what that is like if you're not going to do that well, if you're going to be a shitty adult, if you're going to make some, choices that you wouldn't want for your own children if benefit the hindsight. So I kind of had that. And then I remembered that I wanted to travel because life was getting harder and harder. And at 18, 19, life shouldn't be hard. It really shouldn't. You chemically it's hard, brain chemically it's hard, but
Yeah.
it shouldn't actually be hard. So I started looking for ways to travel, and my granddad worked offshore. And so I sort of knew about that industry. And my stepdad, or really just dad, worked offshore too. And so I went to him. My mum and dad had broken up at the time. And I went to him and I said, "Could you help me get a job offshore?" And he said, "No." And I don't know, but if he'd have just said yes and tried and it didn't work out, I might have taken a different path. But
Sure.
he said no. And I'm so stubborn. And it's a trait. It's a bug and a feature in my life to today. Like, I'm so stubborn. It's criminal. So he said no, and I thought, okay, well, fuck you, I'll do it anyway. And eventually, cut to, I get offshore and I go to work for a Norwegian company, and they took me everywhere with them. So I went to Norway. I left Scotland, sort of 1920. Went to Norway. Went to then Venezuela, Trinidad, Tobago, Nigeria, Bulgaria, like every place. And it was just fun. It was absolutely the best time of my life. No responsibilities,
Love
high
it.
pay. I loved it. It was so good. And, we're working on mainly vessels, some oil rigs and things like that. So that was sort of that. And then we were doing a lot of work in Venezuela. And I did not want to live there because I had the sense of adventure, but I also wasn't willing to die for that sense of adventure. So
Fair enough.
we came, thank you. Yeah, it was like a brilliant thought of mine. We came to Miami, and I was like, "Ooh, kind of don't like it here either, but I kind of like America." And this is nearly 15 years ago now. And so sort of closed my eyes, pointed to the map, and I looked like, okay, well, let's go to California. So
Hmm.
came here, and then I was starting to, after a few years of working offshore, the day rate started to drop for me. So it's sort of like crude to talk about money, but let's just do it anyway. So when grown up for me, and still for a lot of my friends today, they earn on average about $15,000 per year. That's
15,
like
1 5.
1 5 in
Yeah,
Scotland. Like it's, we don't earn a lot of money. We're there's some poverty within that country.
sure.
And so I'd walked into this job and I was earning $14,000 a month. And like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a clue what designer things were. I didn't know how to spend that money. So it stayed in my bank because I didn't care about nice hotels. There was just no place to spend it. And I've actually still got some of it. So I,
I'll take some if you're, I mean,
yeah.
if you're
Well, with
willing.
inflation,
Yeah,
we're
right.
rich. I can afford coffee. um, so I then I done a few things. I went to work in stunts for a little while in California because I live in Los Angeles and that's the industry. Well, it's part of the industry. I done that. But I also had these long distance degrees from working offshore for, all those years, close to a decade. Um, so I ended up with a job in Australia in cybersecurity, and then came back to America because my visa had run out, and they were like, "No, you cannot stay here." Came back and then worked in what's called red teaming, social engineering red teaming, and that is where perception matters most because you're physically breaking into buildings. Like that's the job.
Hmm.
Because I can logically hack into a computer, right? Like, well, not no problem, but it's possible. It's possible. And if I can just gain access to your physical server, it doesn't matter how good your software is or how good your digital defenses are. Like, how are you defending your actual physical assets?
Mm-hmm.
And so we were breaking into different buildings, government buildings, and those people have guns, by the way.
No surprise.
Not a fan. Not a fan. So we were sort of, yeah, I'd done that. And then there was this sort of, again, there's a little bit of skill here, but the role of luck plays a really big part in this. So we were breaking into data centers, really good physical activity for them to undertake to see how secure they are. And I just had a very simple thought, like, if you want to keep them safe, put them underwater. And it was simplistic. It wasn't any more like brilliant than that.
Hmm.
And so I'm like one of the few people on earth, and I'm not being like hyperbolic or uppity or egotistical. Like I just happen to be one of the few people on earth with a cybersecurity background plus a subsea engineering background.
Probably.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like there's not many of that. So then I went to someone I'd worked for before and said, like, what do you think? And he's like, uh, first of all, I had this idea. I'm pretty sure I told you about it. And I was like, well, no, but okay, like I'll accept if you help me. And then he helped me. He tweaked the design, and he's involved with the company today. So that's kind of from then to now.
Whoa. Okay. So, all right, a couple things. Well, first of
Okay.
all, you mentioned the term scallywag. Fairly certain that this is the first time on the 150 or whatever podcast that I've done that somebody used the word scallywag, but I like it. I'm into it.
All right, we'll keep it.
I also the how do you keep something safe, right?
Mm.
Let's drop it to the bottom of the ocean. Like what an insane but also sort of logical concept. So, but don't
When
like
you're
but how does
nope.
that work? Because doesn't technology break when it gets deep in the water? Like
Doesn't
how does this
everything
work?
break no matter where
Yeah.
you put it?
I
Well,
got a
so
cell phone right here. If I drop it in the water, I got to put it in rice all weekend, right?
oh, yes, try that. Here's so let's back up. One, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If
For
I was an
sure.
astronaut, maybe I'd be like, oh, let's put them in
That's
space.
right.
Because, like,
Yeah, yeah. Let's put it on the
you
moon.
know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and by the way, that will happen.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a lot easier to get things into space. Well, not to get them into space, but to operate things in space than it is to do it underwater. Like, a lot. And we can come to that in a little while, but like, it's a lot easier.
Why they just have more
Um,
electrical outlets on the moon than they do
yeah.
underwater?
You know, we are going to mine them in for something called helium-3 that like we have on Earth, but the atmosphere keeps it out. It's prevalent in the sun, so the moon gets blasted with it. So
Huh.
we will mine it and we'll bring it back to Earth and we'll use it for energy production here. So
I get it.
technically
I get it.
speaking, the moon like does hold some answers. Okay, so that's kind of again, that's how this happened, right? I'm a hammer, the ocean is the nail. I'm like, chuck it in, like, let's go. So there's that. Then, what was the second part? You said, oh, doesn't technology break?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah. So,
water.
so you know what's so interesting about our solution, and actually Microsoft has done a similar thing, and we can come to the differences engineering wise on those on the two solutions here. But when you take away like corrosive materials. So for Microsoft,
Yeah.
they pump in nitrogen. It's non-corrosive, so it's really good for the hardware. We put in a fluid, it's non-corrosive, it's really good
Okay.
for the hardware. There's no dust, there's no debris, there's no hotspots. It's really good for the hardware. So actually, when you have something in an optimal or an optimized environment, the maintenance windows are like lengthened, so to speak. So we see 1/8 the requirements for maintenance. So yes, things will break. We've got a few options if they do break. You know, we can go down there with our ROV, um,
Yeah.
bring it back up. We can fail in place and um, like uh, allocate to a different stack, server stack. Like there's ways around it. It's just
Yeah.
problem solving. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the concept of disaster recovery, right? You have
Yeah.
various other locations that you can connect or back up data
Correct.
to.
Yeah.
So tell me like this whole like so Subsea Cloud, right?
Yeah.
This is your company,
Yeah.
super innovative, and I can see where this hammer nail brainchild of yours turned into a reality. So like, how do you get your business? How do you say, okay, we have a concept where we're going to basically store your data and we're
Yeah.
going to put it in the bottom of the ocean? Like, how do you get your business? And then where do you actually put these physical cloud servers? Like, where in the
Yeah.
ocean are they sitting right now?
All right. So let's start with the last one first because it's a
Okay.
lot easier to answer.
Okay.
So we put them into rivers, ports, dams, and then further offshore, which is sort of a good segue into, well, how do you actually work with oil and gas companies? So if a company has a large suite of subsea assets, we will co-locate with those assets, right? Rigs, even pipelines, like it's all about permitting, really. So that's kind of how we come to work with most oil and gas asset owners or even like operators. And we aim basically to promote the longevity of those past investments for them by buying or renting the sites from them or co-locating with them.
Okay.
And
So then you would like an ideal target for you would be somebody who drills offshore, right? They already
yeah,
have platforms out there. They're already
yeah.
producing
They've
massive
got a zone.
oil wells.
Yeah,
They've got a zone. They've already got the permitting taken
yeah,
care of. And now you're saying, okay, and also we can add this feature, right,
yeah.
to what you guys are already doing and bring additional value where
Oh
you already
yeah,
have all the complicated stuff out of the way. This is simple.
yeah. It's mutually beneficial in a few ways. So one, carbon credits. We co-locate beside you and you don't use us. Fine, let us pay you in carbon credits, which have become
Nice.
important to the asset owners. Also, we need to fiberize rigs and we need data centers there because there's no redundancy on a rig. We want to be processing the data in real time. Even in cybersecurity, we know that it is a huge problem. The legacy systems aren't easily secured, and that's a huge problem for not to like scaremonger, but for terrorist attacks, it's maybe a 1 in a
Sure.
trillion chance, or
Sure.
I'm making up the numbers, but these things happen and we do have to protect against them, or just failures, just the normal failures. But we've got components offshore that last for 25 years. It's really hard to economically say, let's swap all those out just so we can get some cybersecurity in here, because most people don't really understand cybersecurity and what could happen if you don't. So we've got that problem, and ultimately real-time data, it becomes very important to rigs. So there's that. And then a lot of oil companies now have wind farm developments, and then we want to co-locate with them. So that's kind of how we work with them. And then you asked, how does this happen? So we go to people and say, you're a cloud provider. Mm-hmm. Here's what we offer. So we cut your CapEx and your OpEx. And we're really good for the environment. And sometimes it works, and sometimes we run into what's called basically the innovator's dilemma. I'm not entirely sure if that's like a common principle that you guys talk about, but basically the innovator's dilemma is, or it asserts that maturing and legacy companies tend to strive for this incremental improvement in their products and their operations, and they optimize like their existing customer base based on what they've done before. But we all know, like, the past isn't really indicative of the future. It will change. So we kind of run into that a lot. And then also, we're optimizing for shareholders who sort of think in quarters, fiscal quarters, and not long term. So we do run into that, but typically we go to cloud providers and we say, hey, we put data centers underwater. Here's what your maintenance will look like. Here's what your costs will look like. Here's what your latency will look like. What do you think? And then there's a long conversation. It's a very long sales cycle. And then we'll test. So that's kind of where we are just now. We're not deploying hundreds of megawatts. We're deploying tens of megawatts with different companies.
Okay.
So yeah.
So you actually go to the cloud provider. So you would go to AWS or Google or Microsoft or even some more niche like Crusoe Energy within oil and gas and say, okay, we've got this concept. Is this a logical add-on for you guys? Or I guess you could go directly to an offshore operator or anybody operating in a subsea capacity and just work directly with them. And then they tell the cloud provider that they want to use you.
Correct. Exactly.
So when am I hired? I fully explained your business model. No, I think it's really cool. And I'm curious, like you mentioned the carbon credit component, which to me is pretty relevant. In the last, that didn't mean anything to me 2.5 years ago, but really in the last few years, the concept around whether it be ESG, or carbon credit or emissions reduction. There's a lot of buzzwords and terminology that exist. And for me, I'm always curious around opportunities where monetization can happen as a means of carbon reduction. So you're doing that. Like that's a big part of your business, it seems like today, where you're basically going in and saying, let us co-locate. You guys can get the carbon credits for this and everybody's happy. That's cool. Like how do you calculate what the carbon credit offset would be?
Yeah, so sort of in the weeds calculation, but basically, so for I think it's every megawatt hour of power that we use from fossil fuel equals half a ton of carbon. So let's say we're not co-located with a wind farm here, and we are just running off of the grid. Then we save about 960 tons of carbon per year. In California, you get about $700 for that. So that's kind of how we calculate it. We might, it fluctuates. What I will say about sustainability is we have to get there, right? We do have to become more sustainable. But the way we are doing it is fucking insane. It's ridiculous because we're tricking people all the time. I don't have a bad relationship with journalists. I might after this next thing that I'm going to say, but I really respect journalists, but I can't get behind these like sensationalized headlines about things like carbon capture. What a waste of time. But because the government wants it to look like, well, we're doing something now, instead of doing the right thing, but it might take 5 or 10 years, we're doing this now and it's great. No, it isn't. It's absolutely like one of the worst things that we can do. And the other thing is like just renewables by themselves. Yes, we can generate quite a lot of power or energy, but you can't get it. There, attenuation exists and storage challenges exist. So like you have to have this respect for the reality and where we are right now, which we absolutely do not have. And that is then like amplified by the media not telling us the truth, because it's extremely hard to go into the technical components of renewables and carbon capture and understand the math if you don't have that background. And it's not sexy to talk about. So even if I want to talk about that to someone, they're not willing to listen because you're talking in numbers, and like that's the best way to present it, but it's not the sexiest way to present it. So I have a huge issue with our current like landscape, how we're presenting to people. And the other thing is, and I promise you, like, you can have a word in a minute, but like the other thing is our reliance on oil and gas, instead of going down in the last 20 years, it's gone up. Our dependency has gone up. And there's four things, like these four modern pillars of society that we absolutely cannot or will not do without. Steel, how are you going to build your houses? How are you going to build your buildings? Everything else we use steel for. Cement, not going to happen. Ammonia, will literally half the world's population will die because fossil fuels equal ammonia. And we need that for our crops. We have to synthesize ammonia. We don't have enough to grow crops for the 8 or 9 billion people on the planet. So like, who do you want to kill off first? So there's that. That's a little sensationalized, I admit. And then the fourth one is like plastics, fossil fuel dependent. So when you go into hospital, what do you want to be touching? What, like, because your bed, the mattresses have a like fossil fuel dependency, the IV bags, everything touches oil and gas. And instead of talking about that, instead of saying to people, giving them a chance to be rational about it, saying, here's what we depend on, here's how long the transition will really take. By the way, it took us about 100 years to get from our wood and coal burning to where we are now. We're not going to be able to do this in 20 years. Instead of saying that to people, we say, oh, well, don't worry about it. We'll capture the carbon. It's insane. Yeah. Okay, we'll return to this soapbox later. But that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. I mean, I have these conversations a lot, just in terms of what does the energy transition look like? And it's hard for me to answer that question, because to me, and I know this is something that Digital Wildcatters talks about a lot too, is it's really energy addition. I mean, there's nothing to transition when you're increasing the usage of the current sources of electricity. That's just the reality of it. So we have to find new ways for all energy. And I've said this on this podcast before too. My house is located in an incredibly sunny area. I have solar panels all over my roof. To me, it's making the most of where energy is available in all forms. And I think that's the approach that, generally speaking, people need to take. But again, off of my soapbox now as well.
Well, there's like something else to be said. So there's this like dichotomy that companies are responsible for some of the emissions and we are responsible for others, but actually it's not really worth the categorization, I don't think. For instance, I drive a car, but a company made that car. If you look at the supply chain and how much just CO2 and other gases are involved in that, it's one thing, but here's the other thing. We underprice our like commodities, and we underprice our resources, water being the worst victim, and also oil and gas.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be able to drive a truck. Like I shouldn't be able to afford to do that. But I can, because the fuel is underpriced. So either we need to increase the cost it is to buy, because then the incentives become aligned. People shouldn't be driving and I know like this is not a popular opinion, but we shouldn't be driving these SUVs. If you're one person, like, get a smart car. Now there's a different aspect of
Oh,
this.
there's the
Critical safety,
European, there's the
California.
European in her coming out. We shouldn't let you guys have all these big trucks. No, it's just
But
America.
no,
We
but
always want something bigger.
oh, I know, but all of us do. We're all grown in size, but aside from that, so like, I don't want to fight with people over their size of cars. I really don't, because what the companies could do is they could make the engines more fuel efficient, which is
Yeah.
far better than what we're doing with electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are not the answer here for so many reasons. One, when you charge it, most likely you're charging it with fossil fuel. So
Yeah.
like,
Or coal.
what? Or coal, yeah. And here's the other thing, like, and I don't know if your audience is going to be so like turned off by these technicalities, but when you drive your car, if it's an SUV or a smart car, it doesn't matter, right? You drive it, the fuel gets consumed and it sort of comes out the back,
Yeah.
and it gets lighter. That doesn't happen in an electric car. It keeps its same weight the whole time. So the lower you are on battery, the more battery power it has to use, because the load is heavy.
Yeah.
So then you're charging more than I'm fueling, because your car stays the same weight. Now, is that like, it's a silly point of view. It kind of doesn't matter, but it's just something else to think about.
No, it's fascinating. And you're making me think. I'll probably have to sit around and think all weekend now. Thank you, Maxie. Really appreciate that.
Live a life. Just live one day in my life. It never stops. The chatter never stops.
Yeah, well, I like it. You're touching a lot of different parts of both energy. The have to understand the carbon market, have to understand the subsea space, have to understand the data space, have to fundamentally understand oil and gas and energy as a whole. So it's cool. I think you have unique insight for this. In terms of like the way that you look at oil and gas, since this is an oil and gas centric podcast, do you feel like your growth opportunity is substantially within the oil and gas space, or what other types of companies, is it maritime industries and verticals, will you see your most significant growth?
I think in order to care about growth for my company, I have to want and try to create an ecosystem that is not dependent on any one sector. Like, my goal here as CEO, the vision is to have like a very large ecosystem with subsea cable providers, subsea asset owners, wind farm owners. At some point we'll get to tidal, at some point we'll get to, offshore solar, things like that. So it's sort of, instead of, there's this economy of scale, I guess, that exists for us, and we have to care about it all. So yeah.
So it's diversification. That's going to be your key to growth.
Correct. Like. Yeah. You're hired. You're good at this. You can just sum up all the things that I like succinctly or non-succinctly say.
Yeah. So I'm not like a particularly smart person, but I think everybody has their own superpowers, right?
Yeah,
and I think one of my superpowers, and I'm going to pat myself on the back right here, is that I can take fairly complex concepts and then explain them in a way that a layman would understand it. I think in part because I'm a layman. So it takes me a while to say, okay, what exactly are you saying? What does this do? And then just enough life experience, and I can be like, okay, it's this. Because so many times I've been taught things in my life, even oil and gas, it took me a long time to really understand the whole oil and gas ecosystem and the concepts, because it wasn't really taught to me in a way that was digestible. Eventually, I started to figure it out, and I think, okay, how can I explain a very complex, engineering-centric, technical industry to somebody who really knows nothing about it other than putting oil and gas, getting an oil change and putting, gasoline into their vehicle. So understanding like, okay, it wasn't necessarily explained to me in a way that I could digest it immediately. I want people to be able to take the Cliff's Notes of really what it is. And then how deep they want to go from there is kind of up to them. So
honestly,
Yeah.
I think it's genius. It's such a life skill because you can be the smartest person in the room. You could be able to do every calculation. You could be a
Yeah.
physicist. It doesn't matter if you can't explain it. Then it just exists in your head, and that's just no good. So I really appreciate that brand of smartness because it
Huh.
really is smart.
Well, thank you. And now I guess since I'm making this is my podcast, so I'm making it about myself. Sometimes both my parents are teachers. My dad's a retired professor. My mom is an elementary school art teacher. So I think I probably learned from them, right?
Mhm.
Okay, let's take things. I mean, psychology as a whole is like incredibly difficult to fully understand and comprehend,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
my dad would take these concepts and then create examples and relate it for college students in a way that they could
yeah,
actually understand it. One of the
yeah.
classes that he taught that I loved, and one of the fun things about having a dad who's a professor of anything or professor of
Mhm.
psychology was I grew up in Plymouth, New Hampshire, and Plymouth High School was right here, and about a half mile away was my dad's office at Plymouth State University. So sometimes after school, if I had time or in the middle of the day, I would just walk down and my dad would be at the chalkboard and I'd sneak into his classroom and sit in the back. Right.
I love it.
And then
That's
start
like
to
my
take notes.
dream.
Yeah. And then he'd turn around and I'd raise my hand. But it was really fascinating to see the way that he would communicate these relatively complicated concepts
Yeah,
and topics and still create some level of engagement. One of
yeah,
the classes that he created the syllabus for and taught that was always like sold out immediately or signed up for immediately was the psychology of film. And I think that's
ooh,
something that everybody can sort of relate to. And he you know, whether it be the Matrix, right,
yeah,
or something, he can sort of allow people to understand themes and concepts of
yeah,
psychology through
yeah.
film. And then I think that's a learning style that college kids especially appreciate, right, versus learning from a book.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just at a conference where someone said like fashion, music, film, and I'm forgetting. There's some
Sports.
like no, it wasn't sport, although sports talent dominant. No, but basically we're saying art exists, as one, but we categorize it. And I thought like it was a point of consideration for me because I didn't automatically agree. I wasn't like, oh, I was like, is that true? And I've thought about it ever since. But it's so interesting to learn something through a form of art. Because
Yeah.
was that the intention of the filmmaker? Probably not. So is this some sort of bigger than the parts? Probably. It's quite interesting.
Maybe it
Um,
was. I don't know. I tend to think that it probably was, that there's always sort of a hidden meaning that some of us will get and others won't. And that's the
maybe,
beauty of
yeah.
sometimes watching shows or films multiple times, because you're always going to see something the second time that you
Yeah.
didn't see the first
Yes.
time, right?
It's funny you
Which I
should.
love.
Me too. Because like I hate what I really dislike watching something new. I love watching things I've watched before, and I don't know why. It's some psychological like trauma. It's some flaw I have, but like I love watching things over and over again. It's weird, but it's sort of funny that you should say like you started the top of that. You said like I'm not particularly smart, and I don't think that's true, but it kind of doesn't. But
Doesn't
perceptions.
matter.
So,
Yeah.
but I'm like I'm so intellectually what's the word? Not fearful. There's a word for it. You're gonna have to edit this. So like
No way.
intellectually.
No, we're rolling with this.
Oh no.
Intellectually fearless?
No, not fearless. I am intimidated is the right word by
Really?
people. Unbelievably so. Like that. I read a book a week. Every week I read a book because I read 50 pages a day. It's self-discipline. It's not smart,
Whoa. Good for
but
you.
like I do that because I'm so intellectually just intimidated. And this
Huh.
is this is going to sound shitty, and it's not. So I'll fix it once I've said it. Normally not by women, mainly by men, because women I have a shorthand with. If they're smart, I'm like, yes, a smart woman, or like, and again, my perception, you might be smart and I might not recognize that, fine. But if I recognize that you're smart, then I want to be around you for sure. And I've got
Yeah.
a shorthand with you psychologically, like, your gender to gender is like, there's something important there. Then with men, if I think you're smart, I can get a little bit quiet, and it's really strange. I don't know why I have it, but that is why I strive to be informed and know things down to the last detail. Like I can tell you exactly, like we've we're pumping out about 4 billion tons of crude oil, and that means that like that's 5 billion cubic meters, and globally we've got 30 billion tons of CO2, and we're about to put that underground. But so we're going to put double the amount of CO2 underground as storage than we are pumping up oil. There's no reason for me to know that. There's no reason for me to recite that to you, but I know it because I'm so anxious about being caught out not knowing something. It's a real challenge. So
I like that. I mean, yeah, it's, I mean, to bring it, I'm a sales guy, right? That's sort of been my career path and training. One of the things that I do that I really enjoy, one of my friends is actually a sales professor at Bentley University in Massachusetts. And he has probably about a dozen or so different sales leaders or entrepreneurs that are kind of sales centric, speak to his college kids every semester. And he always asks me. It's a huge honor and I love to do it. And the questions that the students ask, they're very prepared. They did their research. They looked at my profile. They looked at my website. They did their background, their homework. I love it. And they'll come in and they're generally like very authentic and vulnerable, I feel like, in the questions. And in the last one that I presented, probably about a month and a half ago, something like that, one of the students, it was a young woman, she's probably 20, 21 years old. She said, how do you, like, I'm just generally kind of a nervous person. I don't like speaking in front of large groups. Like, how do you have any advice for me on how I can not be as nervous when I'm going in and presenting to an audience? And I said, and especially if I'm trying to sell them something, now you're adding like a whole nother layer of nervousness.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think it's a couple things, right? Experience is going to help you just doing more and more of it. You're going to start to view these situations as more comfortable versus just intimidating, anxiety inducing, and challenging. But even more than that, like, what are you worried about? You're worried about getting called out and not having an answer to a question.
Yeah.
Right. And looking like you're a fool and losing all the respect and credibility of everybody that you're actually trying to do business with in that room. So to bring it back to what you said, Maxie, how do you get rid of some of that fear or some of that, fraud or whatever you want to say?
Yeah.
It's really having as many of the answers as possible and then understanding if you don't have that answer that you can go ask somebody else who does, right? That it's okay. Yeah. But that took so much time to be able to figure out, right? But truthfully, like as researched as you are, you still know you're not going to have the answer to everything. And sometimes just that acceptance is okay.
And like I have like a brand of this intellectual intimidation that is sort of, it's there, but it's slightly adjacent. So I can say, if you asked me a question in a casual conversation and I have to say, I don't know, I'm actually okay with that.
Yeah.
It's that you and I could sit down. You know what? Oh God, this is like therapy. As I sit down with a man, I can't explain this. I automatically feel like you're equal. Now, if I say something and then it's wrong or I don't know something that you know, does that make me not your equal? So it's probably around there, but it actually never happened to me. But it's such a fear. So it's sort of, if you ask me who I was at the start, I'm just barely getting through life, but it's
all of us are,
I know.
Right? I mean, I really like that you are vulnerable and open and really genuine in this discussion. And I would also just say to you, like, you're not only an entrepreneur, you're a female, and you're somebody who's figured out like very complex, challenging concepts, whether it be cybersecurity, subsea cloud, data. That people will probably be intimidated actually talking to you. It's most likely going to go in the other direction, right? Which is probably wild for you to hear, but it's the truth. And I have a great deal of respect for what you've built because it's a lot of stuff that I can't really even wrap my mind around, let alone, okay, how do you program an ROV to go, deep to the bottom of a body of water to go fix an electrical issue with a cloud-based data server? It's insane. The concept is insane. And I give you a lot of credit for going after it. Like, good for you.
Thank you. I have, of all of the things I have, and I would love for people to understand what it is so that they can sort of cultivate it in themselves too, some people at least. I have like a very high self-actualization. If I can do
Yeah,
something, then I will just do it. Like
sure.
that's my, I guess, ethos in life. If I can do it, then I will do it, because why wouldn't I? And I hope I'm so glad not that many people are like me. The world would be fucking chaos, but I'm so happy that I get the enjoyment I get out of life because of those thought patterns.
I love it. I love it. Final question for you. I said 45
Yeah.
minutes. Of course, we're going
Yeah.
past 45 minutes because you're a fun one. Here's a question, right? So you're technical, right? And I think part of
Mm,
your strength is taking ideas and actually executing on them. Do you have any advice either for your younger self or other entrepreneurs that create a concept, right? And a technical solution and actually turning that into a business? Like how do you look at that? Because it's one thing
yeah.
to have an idea, everybody has ideas, but actually turning it into a profitable, revenue generating, viable business.
Mm,
Like some of your learnings, any thoughts, any advice you'd have to some of our
yeah.
younger entrepreneurs here?
For anyone, you're right. We all have ideas. I've had some good ones and some bad ones. The thing for me in business is you have to be solving a problem, and that problem should matter, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um,
I
that's the way to
love
think about
that.
it. Yeah, and that's, I'm not belittling. Okay, so for instance, I just put my hair up into a band, and that band's going to snap bits of my hair. I don't care, but someone out there does care about their hair, so they're going to make a band hopefully one day that doesn't snap
It
hair.
doesn't
Great.
snap.
So your problem, how it weighs on you, how you see that problem, I don't think is a problem. I'm never going to try to solve that. I think data is a huge problem, and here's a solution to it. So find the problem that you care about, that matters, and solve it. And then what I would say about building a company is there's no, much like parenting, there's actually no like blueprint. There's no manual that comes with it. So
For
for
sure.
me, what I've like distilled or reduced it down to is I am a problem solver. That is my job. So I have a solution. The problem is like, how do I get people to adopt it? And I go with that. And then there's these tiny other problems just within the big problem, but it's just constant problem solving. If you
Mm,
can't do that, if you don't like doing that, then it might be really hard for you. But honestly, viewing it that way is very helpful. Find the goal, go towards that by solving problem by problem. Like that's the secret.
love it. Love it. Maxie, where can people find you? What's your website? Do you have any social media pages you want to direct people to? Things like that.
I have LinkedIn and I'm fairly active on there. Um, because I've got to keep up with those pesky men on there who are running the world. So LinkedIn for sure. I just recently created a Twitter. I think it's like underscore Maxie Reynolds, something like that. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not active on there, so I probably wouldn't bother. And then my site is just subseacloud.com, and
Subsea
we
Cloud.
subseacloud.com, and we have like a big deployment coming up at the start of next year. So we're, instead of doing one-on-one with companies, going to, insert big company name here, instead of saying to them, hey, do you want to see what this looks like in your architecture to see if you want to adopt us? We're saying to 16 companies, which is because one for each rack of servers in our unit. We're saying like, come in, we're going to deploy probably around Europe, maybe New Zealand. And I think we'll make a little press release for that, make ourselves feel a little bit important. Back to the top.
Create that perception, which becomes
Yeah,
people's realities. Maxie
correct.
Reynolds, awesome to have you on today. Really appreciate you being part of the Digital Wildcatters Network. Hopefully, you get on some other
Yeah,
podcasts here as well.
yeah.
Continue to get you some exposure for what you're doing, since it's super cool, super creative, and it's super techy.
Mm-hmm.
But enjoyed getting to know you better. Thank you for coming on. For everybody listening, especially our oil and gas audience, anybody offshore, Subsea Cloud, check them out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maxie.
Thank you so much. Thank you.